So we talked about this morning about the 3 different agricultural systems in Israel, UAE, and in the Midwest. We used that to set the frame for how things work today, but then went into the second topic, which was for us to be able to solve for the challenges of feeding a very large and growing population that's going to require a lot of resources. The system of today is not going to do it. We have to transform. We talked about what that needs to be, and we looked at solutions that are trying to address it. What today we are going to talk about is one of the solution strategies is the idea of building ecosystems to solve big challenges. And then we have a crazy idea, building on Anya's crazy idea theme. And that is, instead of just one ecosystem solving it, could we connect multi-geography ecosystems and together, through that collaboration, solve these problems? And we already got a hint of that when you think about what Ram Fishman was talking about in Tel Aviv University and his approach to helping our smallholder farmers adopt innovation that is already widely available, but not in those particular markets. So you see there how a connection of one system to another can lead to transformational change. So today we will talk about the ecosystems. And Anya, of course, has done a tremendous amount of work in building ecosystems in Israel with her colleagues there. It has been very much their strategy for transformation and ecosystem approach. And that's something we in the United States actually are not that really good at. We are getting better over time. Silicon Valley was an organically created ecosystem. But what will be surprising to you all here in St. Louis is we actually have a very high-performing innovation ecosystem in biosciences. We are so modest about it. We don't even know we are that good. And people come from around the world, and when they sit down and talk and meet with us and see how we do it, they go and say, my God, you guys have something really great. How come you're not talking about it? And so we'll have Don Rubin, who was involved in the creation of one of our ecosystems in biosciences, talk about that journey. But then actually more interesting will be Natalie talking about a case study of a company that got created. And one would make the case, and she's going to make it, is but for this ecosystem, would it be impossible for a company like this to get created? So that's a little bit of what we're going to talk. And then I really want you guys getting excited about what's coming next. And that is, we are going to have 5 very innovative companies. They're going to just blow your minds about what they're doing. Imagine if you were trying to solve for water challenges, not having enough drinking water. And a crazy entrepreneur says, what the heck, there's so much water in the air. Why don't you just suck it out of the air and deliver it anywhere you can? Well, there's a company called WaterGen, and there's Barak, the crazy CEO, sitting there saying, I can do it, and he's doing it. That's just an example. We've got 4 other great examples. We've got a company called PastureBox that is doing something crazy in how you can feed livestock out there without having to use all that land for growing the pasture, on and on. So we'll be really looking forward to you all seeing those solutions as proof points and hope for how we're going to take on the big challenge of climate-smart agriculture and food security. OK, so thank you for allowing me to do that framing work there. And so what I'd like to do is, Anya, I just feel like I've got to give you a few minutes to talk. I know you don't want to talk. You want to just listen. But I think it'll be really good. And we don't have to use a lot of slides. You don't have to use any slides. We have your presentation. But you want to not use it? Just talk? You want to use it? You tell me.
I can talk forever.
Yeah. So I think what will be.
I just think maybe people are a little boring.
So it's my job. So much. You don't worry. You stay where you are. My job is to make it interesting. OK?
OK.
So I think what I'd love to have you talk about, Anya, is why an ecosystem approach is the appropriate approach for taking on big challenges versus just saying, let the market figure it out, let a company figure it out. Why an ecosystem approach?
Well,
Help us understand.
I just read the BioSTL presentation, and I was like, they're using my slides. So I think you already know the answer to that question.
But help us understand that.
But I think that's the whole idea. In order for some successful, I'm talking high tech, right? So I'm not talking about other ecosystems. But in order for something to happen, all the pieces that build that ecosystem have to work together. So let's say you want to have lots of startups. You need to have VCs because startups need funding. But VCs don't want to come and open an office if there's not enough deal flow. And you want to have many startups with deep technology, so you want to have a good research. But if you don't have a tech transfer, that great research doesn't come to the industry. And then you build all those startups, and they need to hire relevant people. So if you didn't prepare human capital, they don't have anybody to hire, and they move to Boston. I don't know if it happened to you guys,
Yep.
but our companies moved to Boston or to the Valley. So you need the human capital. And if you're building a startup, but you need for it to scale and to learn how to grow, you need to have a collaboration with large companies. So if your large companies, let's say food tech industry, if your local food tech companies are not innovative and don't get it that they should be working with startups, those startups don't understand anything about the market. You know, nowhere it's more evident as in digital health companies because they just don't understand how the healthcare system works. So they invest something, they build it, and then the hospital's like, no, we don't use that. We work differently. So all of those pieces have to work together. And they have to somehow be created at the same time. And they have to somehow collaborate together. And frankly, one of the things we realized early on that you need somebody in the ecosystem to lead or to be a focal point and to look around and say, hey, what's missing? Let's do something. So the way we solve it, I don't know who established BioSTL, but we just from now on, I'm going to say we just need to have a BioSTL for every such ecosystem. So the way we solved it in the government, we created incentive programs. And it's not just a particular area. It can be geographic. So we just built a program for Beersheba, and you're actually getting some 100 people from there coming to learn from St. Louis on how to build innovation ecosystems. And we did the same for Arab entrepreneurship. We have a large Arab population with very high percentage of clinicians and doctors and medical researchers and nurse staff, and very little entrepreneurship coming out of there. So how do you build that ecosystem? Or climate tech and so forth. So that's the ecosystem approach. Mapping what's there, mapping what's missing, and what's missing, you have to provide incentives or somehow make it happen. Because if you don't have it all, it doesn't work. Other companies go to Boston.
Fantastic. What a great summary of something that I think, Don, you can easily line up everything that has happened in our region and happened at BioSTL and with our partners through that lens. But before I have Don talk, remember I told you, you guys are going to have to chime in with questions. Okay, I'm going to make it happen whether you want it or not, okay? So start thinking about the questions you all have for this wonderful panel. Use the mic generously. I really want to involve you guys in this conversation. Okay, so Don, you heard Anya talking about why an ecosystem approach is necessary for solving these big problems, and how you put the pieces together. But the idea of having this one entity that is continuously thinking about what's the gap and finding a way to pull the partners together. Why don't you share with our audience in St. Louis and around the world why BioSTL was created, who created it, what was the purpose, and what was the journey, and where are we today?
Yeah, thank you, Vijay. And just listening to Anya, it is so simpatico, so parallel to our experience. To answer your question directly, where we came from, it was because we were, St. Louis 21, 22, 25 years ago had tremendous intellectual capital. strong universities, medical schools, research institutions, corporate research programs, but lacked all those other pieces of an entrepreneurship startup ecosystem. So indeed, we were like a farm system for Boston and for California. And ideas were going there because they didn't have the people, the capital, the places, all those things. And our founder, a person named Bill Danforth, Dr. William Danforth, who was the chancellor for many years of Washington University, and a founder of this institution that we're sitting in as well, he recognized that an ecosystem meant a mosaic of a lot of aspects that need to be in place. In fact, he was a physician by training, and his analogy was that when a child grows, all the pieces need to grow in tandem and parallel together. The arms, the legs, the heart, the lungs. If one goes too fast, bad things happen. If one piece goes too slow, bad things happen. And BioSTL was created to really try to orchestrate those pieces so that they do happen together, and brought together a coalition, which today even exists today. We call the BioSTL Coalition, made up of leaders from corporate, from entrepreneurship, from investing, from universities, all of the stakeholders in building an ecosystem. And it's kind of a continuous quality improvement approach of identifying gaps and trying to solve for those gaps over a period of time. And what Anya described really resonates with me. We used to think about, well, if we help to create and jumpstart venture capital, but there's no deal flow, the money will go to the coasts. If there's deal flow and no capital, the deal flow will go to the coasts. We had the same conversations about real estate. It was hard to get a developer in St. Louis, a very conservative city when it comes to finance and real estate development, to develop space for startups, unless there was a pipeline of tenants. If there wasn't space available, the tenants might leave and not stay. So it was a very delicate balance of trying to orchestrate all of these pieces together.
At least you weren't the government agency.
Well, I was going to say the biggest difference between listening what you've described and our situation was we were not the public sector. We were the private sector coming together, philanthropy, universities, businesses, business organizations, and there was pluses and minuses to that. So we didn't have the resources that even some other U.S. states were putting in back 20 years ago. Michigan took their tobacco settlement and put it into life sciences research, and there were lots of approaches in different states around the country. But what we also found in many of those states is that a governor would retire, a new governor would come in and flip the switch and turn that off, and there was no continuity. There was no continuity in policy or programming. It was the whim of whoever the new political leader was. And usually if it was a new leader, they wanted to create their own brand. And even if something was working, it's like, that's not what we want to do. We want to do something new. So it was a disadvantage to not have access to large pools of public funding. But it was an advantage to not have the access to those pools because they were very inconsistent, and we were able, probably, fast forwarding to today, 21 years later, I think a lot of folks have recognized the secret to our success has been what they call the stick-to-itness, right? We've had a plan, we've been sticking to this for 2 decades. So many other efforts that we see launched in our state, in our city, in other states around the country, they start for a while, and then people get tired of that and they move on to something else. And we've been at this biosciences now for 21 years and still going. And we know we've come a long way, but we know we have a long way still to go.
When we started building this ecosystem approach, we brought a lady who built the biotech in Boston. I don't know if you remember, but Boston used to be engineering. Digital was there. And then somebody just decided we have all those universities, and nothing's going on in Boston. Everybody goes. And she got $1 billion US to make this change. So I'm glad I brought her to talk to the government, because if I brought you, I wouldn't get a penny. But they actually gave me a lot of money because look what she did in Boston.
Yeah. So Don, I wanted to bring the story of Natalie Benson Hill into the picture. And in fact, maybe you may want to talk about one of the things that we do at BioSTL that led to the creation of companies like Benson Hill and CoverCress, maybe just as some proof points, and then we can bring Natalie's voice into the conversation.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about the mosaic and all the components of an ecosystem, we now summarize that in a pithy little startups, capital, people, place, policy, and global connectedness. I don't know how pithy that is, but those are kind of the components that we think about now. And all those things have to happen together to have a successful ecosystem. On the startups and capital side of that, our approach that we've now been at for well over a decade now is what we call the biogenerator, which is our investment and startup arm. Like BioSTL, it's a nonprofit. Sometimes people are surprised that we, as a nonprofit or an NGO, are able to make investments and build for-profit companies. But our charitable mission is to build St. Louis. It's to create economic activity. It's also to take ideas that can help solve human challenges and take them from the lab and turn them into products that can actually make a difference. So it's a good charitable mission, and it's all part of a nonprofit mission. But the biogenerator has evolved over probably 17 or 18 years now from its founding, when there was very little deal flow at the very early days. I think in our first 5 years, we did 7 or 8 deals. Now fast forward to today, and we've supported probably 400 to 500 companies in one way or another. We've invested in, I think, 105 companies. We've invested under, I think, $37 million over the last decade or so. And that $37 million has leveraged $2.7 billion now in follow-on funding from smart money investors, from institutional investors, from venture capital, from corporate investors. And 90% of that comes from outside St. Louis. So early on, we thought that if we could just kind of crack that VC challenge and jumpstart some venture capital, that would solve all of our problems. We quickly learned that that was not the solution. It was really about the people, taking great technology and putting it together with great teams. And when you can do that, you can attract capital from around the world, really. And we've seen that happen. And the biogenerator does a lot of the hard work at the very beginning of a company's life, non-dilutive, free support that we like to think not only is de-risking a technology and positioning it for investment, but as I think my colleague Martha Schlicker is here somewhere, because we'll see her in a little while, says, it creates an unfair advantage for our startups over startups from someplace else, because they get a lot of free stuff, a lot of really great talent, help in getting grants. They get they get access to free laboratory space that is almost unheard of in most places. There's a lot that we do for a company in its early days to give it a boost before the big investors come in. And that's kind of the story of the biogenerator.
Yes, and through that was the Benson Hill story and then the CoverCress story. So Natalie, can you tell us about Benson Hill? What is the company about, what it does, and then the journey from an idea to a publicly traded company?
Certainly. Well, thank you so much for the chance to be here. And thanks to both of you and the Danforth Center, lots of folks. We have lots of supporters in this room. I'm very grateful for all you guys have done. I'll start a little bit with my personal journey, actually, that led to Benson Hill, because I think it's another case study, truthfully. I'm an environmental toxicologist by training. I did not grow up in St. Louis. I finished school, went to Washington as a science fellow to a US congressperson, and was exposed to all kinds of companies, public sector, private sector, all kinds of things, and realized I was really ginned about the use of science and innovation to solve big challenges. And I wanted to work for a company that was doing some cutting edge work, maybe in the tech space, maybe in the business space, maybe in the policy space, I wasn't sure. But a lot of roads were leading to St. Louis. And so I came to St. Louis and I worked at what was Monsanto at the time, is now Bayer, across the street for almost 20 years. And had a wonderful experience there. And was in different roles, led sustainability, was very aware. Monsanto, is, for those who might not know, was a seed, but essentially a seed company, a very large seed company, very focused on providing farmers with tools that can help them improve the productivity of their crops, which is really important, and of course has a very large sustainability impact. But I also was hearing a lot about what consumers were looking for in what the food system looked like, and the kinds of global challenges around the world of how we're going to feed everyone, how we're going to give them enough protein, how we're going to do this sustainably, and everything else. And I decided to leave Monsanto and start consulting, because the food system at the time, this was a few years ago, was going through a lot of flux and change, and a recognition of how serious these issues were, and were we positioning ourselves for that. And so I started consulting with different organizations, from farmers all the way to very large food companies and policymakers and others. And they were in all different places, but a lot of them were in St. Louis. So some of the largest farm organizations that I consulted with were right here in St. Louis asking these big questions. Some of the largest food companies were here in St. Louis asking those same questions. And I knew when I left, I'd seen that the amount of investment in agriculture had about quadrupled. This was in about 2015 or so. And a lot of it had come from adjacent industries, not just the big incumbents. And there were all these startups, a whole new landscape of startups. And I was really curious, like, who are these startups and what are they doing? What's their focus? Are they, like, how are they approaching this very disparate value chain and the big challenges we have? And so I consulted with a number of them, some of them in Boston, some of them in California, one of them in St. Louis called Benson Hill, who I happened to meet at the Danforth Center, because the CEO was giving a talk on this stage and I was sitting in one of those chairs and I was asking him so many hard questions that he actually approached me afterwards. That's how I started working with Matt. He's our CEO.
That's why you need to ask questions.
But not too hard, not too hard. Anyway, and Benson Hill got me really intrigued because, and I don't mean to sound overly harsh and judgmental here, but food is a really fundamental thing. And a lot of startups go into an industry and they're going to disrupt it. They're going to, like, blow it up, they're going to change it, they're going to disrupt it. And food is pretty darn fundamental. You better be careful if you're disrupting it. You know, we've seen what happens when it's getting disrupted. But that doesn't mean it doesn't need to modernize. And it happens to probably have more inertia to innovation than in almost any other industry. So one of the things I actually really admired about Benson Hill that I think partially comes from our roots here in St. Louis is that it was, we're very innovative. We're bold thinkers. We have values. One of our values is to be bold, and that means, like, think outside the box. You know, we don't ask people to come and just say how it's been. How could we do it different? Another one is to be inspired. That's another one of our values. And by inspired, what we mean is there's been a lot of great work and great minds that have done really hard things, and we're standing on their shoulders. And how can we retire and do something building on what they started? And how can we inspire each other and others to do that? And our last value is to be real, which is, in my mind, about being grounded. So be aspirational, you know, reach for the sky to do big things, but you gotta be a bit grounded and practical in what you're doing. And so if you look at the talent that we've been able to draw, and a lot of it's, some's from outside, but a lot of it came from St. Louis, because we have a great talent pool here. They're folks who came from agriculture and farms and understand how that works. And there's people who come from the other side, from some of the largest food companies and retailers, and understand how that works, which is really fundamental to what we do. We don't ask our talent to come and just say how it's always been done. We ask them to say, how has it been done? Why has it been done that way? And how could we do it different and better? And that's something I think that growing up here, we've had the privilege of being able to attract the kind of people who've helped us build that culture. So now, what is Benson Hill? What do we do? So what we do is we're essentially a very advanced seed genetics or genomics company. We're as advanced as any of the largest big seed companies out there, using data science, AI, machine learning, plant science, some of the most cutting edge plant breeding type techniques. But we're not actually a seed company, we're a food technology company. The third kind of science we bring into our genomics engine is food science. So we're looking at what are the different attributes of a plant that can affect the taste profile, the nutrient density profile, and how are we thinking about what the consumer needs at the same time we think about what the farmer needs. So we had this innovation, this genomics engine, we call it CropOS, Crop Operating System, that's essentially running through lots of plant genomics and trying to help us breed faster for different kinds of traits. But the other thing we did was business model innovation. We innovated from the seed to the farm to the processor. We actually own processing facilities, all the way to the CPG or food company and the consumer, to look at what are the different attributes that we want to actually design this plant to do. Because what we've done with our food system, which is great in a lot of ways, is we've optimized it for productivity, for yield and productivity for the farmer, mostly. And that's largely to serve as an ingredient for livestock, which is a very important part of our food system. But we all know the protein demands that we need to reach going forward. We can't only rely on that protein source. We're going to need to scale up and bring more efficiency to other protein sources like aquaculture and plant-based proteins. So when we look at climate-smart agriculture, as you put it, there's one thing for us to breed a plant to have more drought tolerance, and those are great things. But we actually take a much more macro view. We look at it, we need to have these more climate resourceful protein sources as a better, like a more accessible choice for more consumers. We need to bring the same efficiency of scale to those protein sources that we've brought to livestock. And so we do that by designing ingredients, essentially, that are better from the beginning for those outcomes.
And give us an example there.
Yep.
Natalie.
So one of our key crops is soybeans, which is like a powerhouse of protein. And soy yields in the United States have increased over time. Soy protein has decreased over time. And what happens when you're making plant-based proteins, for instance, or feed for aquaculture, you grow a soybean, let's say a commodity soybean that's out there today, and you crush it, and then you have to concentrate it using a lot of water and energy-intensive processing steps to get to a certain protein level, like 65% protein. And then it can be used in a concentrate, soy protein concentrate, that's used in plant-based protein burgers and bakery goods and shakes and things like that. What we did is we bred soybeans that had about 20% more protein from the beginning. And so you plant the soybean and you crush it, and now you can actually use that meal directly as an ingredient. You skip an entire processing step. And that saves like 50% CO2, about 70% water by skipping that step. And because we're doing this in a closed loop all the way through the value chain, we design these soybeans, we partner with farmers to grow them, not just selling them seed, but actually partnering with them. We give them recommendations to optimize not just their yield, but how they're going to express protein on their farm. We're optimizing their practices and their planting systems for protein production. And we train them in things like regenerative ag practices that you might have heard of that help with soil health and carbon sequestration. And then we take those soybeans, we skip a whole processing step, and we bring it to the CPG, ideally designed for some of those protein sources, like I said, that have a really significant climate benefit. And we capture data all the way through. So we're able to give the food company sort of a dashboard of here are the sustainability metrics of how this was grown, here's the traceability back to that farm, and they can pass that on to their consumers.
Thank you for telling us about Benson Hill, the climate smart impact, the unique business model, along with the technology model. I want to just quickly talk about the ecosystem that led to the creation of Benson Hill, all the way from an idea at Danforth Center, the capital raise, the role of BioSTL in the creation, and how this whole ecosystem contributed to the success, maybe?
Yes, certainly. So we really are a case study of all of that. So Benson Hill was actually founded out of research that came out of the Danforth Center here. One of the co-founders is here in the Danforth Center, Todd Mockler. And we had, I mean, from every angle, some of the things you guys have talked about, I think we benefited from. So we think of three things that are really critical to growth. This is what Matt, our CEO, who, by the way, was a VC before he started Benson Hill. So lots of experience working with lots of companies, startups, and things like that. And the three ingredients you need, essentially, are people, talent, infrastructure, and capital. So on the people talent side, I kind of touched on this a little bit. When you have such a different, lots of different companies and institutions here that have this pretty high caliber, tech talent, whether it's on the ag or the food side, that's a great resource for us to pull from. And that's been a really important part of the draw for St. Louis and what we were able to, actually create more of our talent base. On the infrastructure side, it ranges from like the greenhouses and the growth chambers and the different laboratories and just the different players. We have a lot of different, like convenings that happen for that kind of networking, and you learn what somebody else has that you need. So that infrastructure is really critical. And then that capital and the early capital, that's been essential. There's lots of different organizations within St. Louis and outside that have been supportive of us in that way. But I think at the end, what's really probably most important, we're really in a culture in our company. We believe that's really essential to success. I think it's the culture that's been built by folks like you all in this sort of ecosystem. It's a culture of, like I said, kind of bold thinking, but kind of grounding it in, practicality and how we can be working together to, take it to the next step and the next step and the next step in a growth journey.
Excellent. Okay, how about some audience questions or comments? And I'm going to actually pick on Rick Holton. Rick, you've had a big role in some of the things that have happened in our region. As people who don't know anything about St. Louis and what's going on here and your thoughts about how we are a powerhouse in agriculture, I'd love to have you just either ask a question or share a comment. And I didn't even talk to Rick about this. I just did it.
Yeah, I kind of thought I was coming here as a spectator. Rockstar team, great event, thrilled to be here. I think the coolest thing about Benson Hill and CoverCress is, Chris Danforth introduced me to the Danforth Center 10 years ago.
By the way, Rick, you should introduce yourself first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That way you can...
Rick Holton, short mic, Rick Holton, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Herman Companies, a local single-family office. Been supporters of the Danforth Center, BioSTL, known these guys for a while. But go back, I guess, 8 years ago, when you guys started CoverCress, it was Arvigenics when it started. It was just a very interesting thing. I knew nothing about ag except we have a family farm, but I just thought it seemed cool. We got involved with it, and and then we worked together for 8 years. And obviously, you heard. I think
it'll be coming up soon. The CoverCress story.
I don't want to take Mike's story.
No, you can advertise the end.
But it's a great story, and there was a lot of St. Louis investors that believed in the team. It was all these Monsanto executives that retired early, and then they spun up a new company, and local investors supported it. Benson Hill, kind of the same vintage, came out of a biogenerator, came out of the Danforth Center. A bunch of us were on the Danforth Leadership Council, so we were getting awareness and starting the whole 39 North and all that. We actually built your building. I don't know if you know that. Matt wanted a headquarters building, and no one wanted to do it. Like, you can't fund a startup and build them a building, so we took the risk on that. And so we've just been around enjoying the fruits of Don's labor for the last 21 years now. And good friends with the late Dr. Danforth. We're big fans of his, and so we've just been supporting what we can and learning from these smart people
So
all
Rick,
we can. And
what is your point of view on sort of the ecosystem, the role of the ecosystem in the shaping of these kinds of,
I love making up stats. I just told Governor Keogh, I said, well, we're working on this hemp thing with Biogenerator, and we got Jeff coming up next week. And I said, we're the number one state for growing hemp 100 years ago. And he said, I thought we were number 4. I said, well, 1 sounds better, so I'm going with it. Somebody told me that. But no, I think the talent is unbelievable. You've got St. Louis is special for those of you who are gracious enough to come visit. You can talk to the CEOs of all of our companies. Greg Heckman's the CEO of Bunge. I called Deb and said, can he speak at an event? And he came over for lunch. I mean, these are very approachable people. They want to be part of the ecosystem. They're very generous with their time. They obviously support institutions like this. There's a lot of second to none talent. I do know this. We have the highest concentration of plant scientists in the world.
That's right.
So that's been actually verified by an actual count. But when you look at the stuff going on here, it's remarkable. But it's real. And, thanks to the successes, we can point at something, because we all we were faking it till you make it. And now Don's vision from 21 years ago has been realized. So I wish Dr. Danforth was here to see this, and now it's global and it's real. So thanks for having us.
That's a heart-tugging comment right there. You think about that a lot. So again, audience, you guys have a chance to pop in your questions, but yes.
Yeah, hello.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Tony Breitbach. I'm with the Doisy College of Health Sciences at St. Louis University, and it's really funny. A couple of your comments earlier, talking about how healthcare sometimes doesn't take the risks, and they don't think out of the box maybe as much as other things. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're all trained in silos. We're all have specialty accreditors, and there's a nursing school, there's a PT school, there's a med school, and all those kind of things like that. And the other, and one of the things is, the other thing I was impressed with what you talked about is that the dialogue that you have with the academy, telling them what you need from them, right? Not enough of that happens, on our side.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found, most of my research is in interprofessional education, so really training people to work in teams so that they can collaborate in healthcare. And one of the things that when I've heard team come out of everybody's mouth here, and a lot of times, a lot of colleges are concerned more with training people in the skills or the knowledge they need, but they need to know better what they need, the how, about how they go about their business in the workforce. Because everybody can teach the knowledge, right? But the ones that probably make a difference are the ones who can work on those teams, who can collaborate effectively, who can manage conflict, who can take tasks through to the end. So that was one of the things I was impressed with that talk, is that number one, talking to the academic institutions, and really about what are the high value skills that you need on your teams for you guys to work effectively.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So,
Can I say something about
yes,
that?
jump in, Anya.
Well, first of all, academic institutions don't want to listen. If I gave you the impression that they're waiting for us to talk to them, no. I'm speaking at a workshop next week that a whole bunch of academic institutions are holding on freedom of research. And they invited me to speak. So I said, what do you want me to talk about? So they said, come and talk about what the industry needs. And I said, why? So we can decide why we don't want to hear it. It's very hard. I'll give you one example. I had this week, literally on Sunday. My passion is alternative proteins, if you haven't noticed yet. And the most exciting companies come from deep healthcare academic research. So I'm talking to this researcher who built Aleph Farms. I don't know if
Yep.
any of you. And I said, you know, you have 30 people in your lab, you have all this exciting healthcare research, and only one food tech companies. What about additional food tech companies? And she said, you know, we are saving humanity here. This is a side business. And it's been so hard getting the researchers to open their minds to problems of climate, of, you know, food tech, of new proteins, of new technologies, because that's what they're doing. They believe that is the important piece. So we have about 200 food tech companies. Almost all of them came out of research. So we're making progress there, but it's hard work.
Yeah.
It's literally hard work.
Dick, I think you have a question.
Yeah, Dick Fleming, reflecting particularly on Don's comments, and the punchline of the question is, what's the next aha in terms of ecosystem? And the context for that is, having had the pleasure of serving as CEO of the Regional Chamber of Commerce and intersecting with that gentleman that Don described, Dr. Danforth, at a time when everyone in the country wanted to be the next biotech place, and they were all hiring Michael Porter to do $500,000 studies where they changed the name on the study and say they could be the next one. With Dr. Danforth's help, we partnered in doing the Battelle study that led to some real rigor and set the stage for a lot of the ecosystem that Don described, including this facility, including Cortex, including connecting the money with the tech transfer. I'd ask the panel, as you look out over the next 5 or 10 years, what might be that next ingredient in an ecosystem that kind of hits the list that Don shared with us earlier?
So I'm going to jump in as a moderator on that particular thing. So one of the things that we actually are very interested in is ecosystem to ecosystem collaboration. And we came to this through our work with Israel. So as you all know, 8 years ago, we started building a magnet for bringing global innovation to St. Louis to bring value to our major corporations and our farmers, but then also helping these companies get access to revenue and scale, which is what they were looking for. So we've become very familiar with the Israel innovation ecosystem. And what we are now saying is, how do we connect these two ecosystems? And tomorrow, Anya and I are going to spend a full day on this topic. But we think that there is real opportunities for two ecosystems to come together and line up against the strengths that each has, and then figure out how to optimize to solve a big problem versus sitting in their own geographies. This is just one thought, but I'm going to let the experts kind of tear it apart or build on it. Anya, what are your thoughts on that question?
No, well, first of all, I think you're absolutely right. And the interesting thing about food tech is that it's really not a global business. So you're not going to build a company that manufactures food in Israel and then ship it all over the world. That's completely wrong. You want to create the technology and then have the food manufactured locally close to the consumer, because you don't want to spend all the energy and everything. So it creates a lot more collaboration. I think that particular space is so collaborative because you really, and like Natalie said, you work with so many parts of the ecosystem, and they don't have to be local. They don't have to be local for you to learn from them. So I think it's a wonderful idea, and especially very suitable for the ag and food.
Thank you, Anya.
Maybe
Natalie?
we'll come up with some ideas tomorrow.
Yes, we will. We will. Natalie, from your perspective, as you're thinking about, in some way shaping a new food ingredient business, what's, to Dick's question?
What's the big aha?
What's the next? What's the next?
Well, I think this ecosystem is a really key one, but I kind of in a different angle maybe to that question. I think having health come more into the food and ag planning and discussion and innovation is we hear talk of it, but to see it actually coming to life, I think that's the one that's that's coming in, starting to happen more. And honestly, I don't think, I mean, you kind of alluded to this a little bit. I think or maybe it was the gentleman before you, I think sometimes, from my experience working with nutritionists and folks in the medical community, we have a advisory board that has those kind of people on it. They're not necessarily trained very much in food and ag, and yet we know how important that is to health. And so I don't think it's as intuitive for them to think they belong as much in this conversation, and yet they really do, especially with some of the new research going on. So I think that's going to be an aha. And we have a great, here in St. Louis, that's another great area is our medical community.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Don?
I want to, so just on the aha. So we had an aha, we talked about the people, and we're talking about a lot of very highly educated expertise. The aha that we had, we did a labor analysis of the biosciences industry in St. Louis. And we had an aha that we found that I don't remember the exact numbers, but 60% or something like that of the jobs demanded in the industry do not require a college degree. And we've learned from that, and we've initiated programs to to harness employer demand and understand employer demand and match those up with the trainers. So to the gentleman from St. Louis U that asked a question about how do we pair with academia. In this case, we're talking about people, sometimes it's a 2-week training program or a junior college, community college program. But there's a real opportunity for a much larger swath of our community and our population to participate in the growth in this industry. It doesn't have to be an industry that only PhDs, even though we have more plant science PhDs than anywhere in the world. There's a lot more people out there who, including from communities that perhaps have been left behind, who can participate in the growth of this industry. And I think that's better for creating an innovation economy if all segments of the economy benefit from that, not only as consumers, but in the growth and the creation of this ecosystem.
And what's so interesting, Don, is I'm going to come back to Natalie and the CoverCrest team. You'll actually leverage the community college right here in Bridge Park to become a talent engine for the non-PhD talent. So exactly the point you're talking about. Maybe just a few words about that.
Well, I mean, I think it's been a great resource for us, and to be honest, I don't think it was always first of mind.
Yeah.
And so when we became more aware of that opportunity, and your point is a great one, you don't want folks to feel like they have to get such an advanced degree to be part of something. Because one of the things we find about our team, and I mean by that, our whole employee base, we have really high engagement rates. The people involved are they're really passionate about doing whatever they're doing for a bigger global purpose, which I think for young talent is really important. And so the community college has been a great resource for us.
Yeah. Okay.
We talked about
Yes.
ICL, an Israeli
Yeah.
company. They just opened a plant here.
Yeah.
Sheila, where did they open the plant? Okay, so I don't know St. Louis, but Sheila tells me that it's an area that is a lot overlooked.
Yes.
And it's great because they need the people, and the people can work for innovative, future-looking companies. So I'm glad we contribute to.
Well, thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
So ICL is the Israel Chemical Limited, I guess.
That was the original name.
Oh, that's okay. And so so there
ICL.
you are. You're from ICL. Why don't you
ICL
tell
in
us
the
about
house.
what you're
Yeah.
doing? There you go. Tell us about what you're doing here in St. Louis.
Come on.
with
There
that
is a
new
mic
plant.
here. I was looking for him in the crowd, but
Yeah.
I don't have glasses, so I don't see anybody.
And their team member
That's
Peggy is
perfect.
flying in from Israel in another hour or so. She's going to be here
Great.
from Israel.
So anyway, thanks for putting me on the spot. But my name is Ananta Desikan. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for ICL. So ICL is a global but Israeli headquartered specialty mineral fertilizer chemical company. We are 100 years old. We just the origin of the company started about 1922. So we just celebrated our 100th year. And we are pretty, somebody asked me this question, how big are we in St. Louis? I think we have a pretty big, decent footprint in St. Louis. We started an alternative protein plant, a wet fiber technology plant in Carondelet in South St. Louis in December of last year. We just, another topic, we just are going to start, going to hopefully build a big battery materials plant in the same location, actually. We just got a $200 million grant from the Department of Energy. We're super excited about it. So we are pretty, we have a good open innovation program, like what Anya talked about. So I don't know whether we are looking around our corners, but plant science, because we are, one of the divisions that we have is in crop nutrition. And we're not as big as Bayer and others, but we are a pretty significant player in this space. And so we're looking at what is the next generation fertilization technologies that are happening. So we are leveraging the ecosystem, and we're trying to do more as we learn a bit more about this thing. So thanks for this. Yeah.
So you'll be an example of a company where if we connect our two ecosystems, what could we do? You'll be the pilot for us to evaluate that strategy.
So we are actually looking at global companies. Of course, the Israeli ecosystem is pretty close to us, but we are also looking at partnerships outside and how do we connect these two things? Definitely, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
This gentleman is based in New York, but he saw your symposium and decided to spend the day here.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yes. Okay, one more question. Is that it? Last one. We are actually
Yes,
behind.
last question.
Are we
Okay.
late?
All right, my name is Sarah Schlafly. I own a sustainable protein company called Mighty Cricket. And we're focusing on decreasing waste that's entering our food system and then upcycling it back into the food system. But my question has to do with what your thoughts are on larger corporate involvement in the startup ecosystem. Because in St. Louis, Mighty Cricket has gotten a lot of support from Biogenerator and from a whole other sort of resources in the St. Louis region. But the one thing we struggle with is collaborating with corporations, and we produce cricket protein. For example, Purina has a cricket dog food product on the market, and it's really hard to get those conversations just in terms of like, what are they looking for in their cricket protein, and having those discussions. And so I'm curious if you've run into any barriers with trying to involve these larger corporations, and if so, how your thoughts on breaking down those barriers.
So first of all, I think it's part of the ecosystem, and if you don't have a piece in BioSTL of involving large companies, there's your next aha.
Well, you learn
I'm
about
sure
that.
you do have, but yeah, you know, big companies are not very innovative, and they're like very late to the game. So a lot of time it's very hard talking to them. But some of them, like the gentleman from ICL said, have been doing innovation for many, many years, so they're more approachable. I think Bayer is extremely approachable. They're all over the place looking for new stuff. And Purina, I just happen to know that they still have a way to go. Sorry. So I think it's much, much, much easier now talking to those large companies. You know, you go on LinkedIn, you find the right person, you approach them, they usually reply. If they don't reply, they're probably not open to innovation. Go to the next one. But they can be of a lot of help to you. You really can't develop a product without getting input from as many big companies as possible.
Yes. So
I can share some thoughts if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Natalie, maybe you can connect with her, or you want to just make a
Oh,
quick.
I can connect with her after. That's
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that they are very good at is figuring out how to work through and work around and work with existing stakeholders. That's a very important skill of innovators. You got to work around and work through them because you can't go without them. So it's been a really great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.